We could definitely reduce some of the paperwork required in terms of actually setting up a business. The notion of business permits in themselves and being judged as to whether you're fit to do business.
Luxembourg seems to be talking about startups a lot right now, but are we really going to be successful? This is one of the questions I'm going to be putting to the CEO of the LHoFT, who's with me this morning, Nasir Zubairi. Nasir, good morning.
Good morning, Jim. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Now, Nasir, you must admit there's been a lot of talk about startups in Luxembourg over the last few years, hasn't there? I mean, wow, amazing.
Well, SMEs are the lifeblood of any economy, and every company needs to start somewhere, right?
Absolutely. And of course, Luxembourg historically, which has been a bit dependent on the big banks. Let's be honest, there hasn't really been a startup culture, has there?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, about 67% of the economy is SMEs, so there are plenty of small businesses, a little bit lower than most other countries in the EU, but still pretty strong.
Okay, now let's talk about the LHoFT itself. I mean, it's been quite a focal point, I think, for the Luxembourg government. I mean, the LHoFT as an institution, you've fallen into this job of being CEO of what has become like the pivotal point for startups. That must be was it challenging, exciting?
It's been very, very exciting. I wouldn't say we're the pivotal point for all startups. We're, I guess, the pivotal point specifically for financial technology startups, which obviously is our mantra. It's been a fantastic ride. You know, we've helped develop a sector and bring over a large plethora of businesses to help service and progress the traditional finance sector in their objectives with digitalization.
Okay, we've all seen your big Luxembourg House of Startups, that big sign on the corner. Mm-hmm. What do you do in addition to providing office space for these startups?
Well, the office space is more a means to an end. It's really just about getting particularly foreign companies comfortable when they move here to Luxembourg, giving them a community and critically a social life as well, more than anything. There's people feel a bit lonely when they come to a new country with new friends. But the reality is our work is much more intense than that. So we do a lot of work around education, training, and promotional support for these firms to help them build their businesses and grow and scale effectively within Luxembourg.
And this is in the first 2-3 years of their life, and then do you push them out of the nest and they have to...
Well, when we say first 2-3 years of their life, remember that a lot of the companies coming over to Luxembourg are often subsidiaries of fairly well-established companies in other countries, for example, from the US, from Asia, from the Middle East, wherever they may be coming from. They're looking to set up often a subsidiary here in the EU, and Luxembourg is the perfect place for them. So it's not necessarily that they're a startup themselves, but in one notion, they are a startup in Luxembourg. So yes, we're helping them to get the ball rolling and establish themselves and build their business here in Europe.
Now, I have seen, in fact, I've actually written some of the marketing material for agencies that promote Luxembourg in other countries. But secretly, when we say we're in the heart of Europe, I mean, we are sort of in the heart, but we're also quite small, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. And what I like to see often, yes, we're right in the middle of Europe with Luxembourg, but we're also kind of shaped weirdly like a heart as well. You know, there's a lot of the international element of Europe, bringing it all together. You know, 50% of the population are foreigners coming from diverse backgrounds all across the EU and further afield from the US, from Asia. It's a real melting pot within Europe. So we have a particular skill set, obviously, in financial services and more specifically in international business. And again, a lot of firms come to Luxembourg, not just in financial services or in fintech, but you know, in industry. ArcelorMittal is based here, Goodyear is based here. These firms are here because of that international dynamic and to use Luxembourg as a base to trade their goods and services across the entirety of the EU.
Okay, so although the Luxembourg government has actually done many initiatives for startups, it feels like there are some other structural things in the economy that maybe could be changed to make it more startup friendly. What changes would you like to see?
I think there's always changes that could be done to improve things, but I think still overall Luxembourg does better than a lot of EU countries. Bureaucracy is always there. We are still very, very agile, which is one of the main reasons why I love being here after having lived in 8 other countries myself. I really feel that Luxembourg lives up to that dynamic of let's make it happen. But of course,
you mentioned bureaucracy.
Yes.
It's quite a paperwork-heavy country, isn't it?
Again, I quite honestly, having dealt with Germany, France, Ireland, other countries, they're often just as heavy, if
Really?
not worse. Oh my word, yes. However, yes, of course, looking in isolation, we could definitely reduce some of the paperwork required in terms of actually setting up a business. The notion of business permits in themselves and being judged as to whether you're fit to do business. I have to admit, I'm a free market person, and I do believe that if you've got something to sell, be it a service or a good, that the market decides whether it's worthwhile buying your product or service, and it shouldn't necessarily always be up to a public sector body to make that determination. I also think that potentially there are some elements of improvements around the incentives for investment into startups that could be made. I think very critically, as we are increasingly focused on scale-ups, that we look to reform potentially some of the rules related to share option schemes, because that's really a critical element of incentivizing employees and key employees to continue to serve and be motivated in building up the business. And those things aren't particularly easy here, but I know that the government's very, very much aware of this and will be looking to make changes to that legislation over the coming
I mean,
term.
you mentioned scale-ups. Let's talk funding scale-ups, because I understand in Luxembourg it's possible to get started, maybe get grants or loans for the first 100,000 or 200,000 euros, and it may be possible to knock on the door of a VC and borrow 15 million euros, but there's a bit of a funding gap for these scale-ups who they need 5 million, but they've got nobody to ask. How do we set about fixing that problem?
This kind of information seems to proliferate and has done over the past few years. And as I've always maintained, good businesses always find money. Part of our job is connectivity with VCs and helping businesses get access to capital. We've helped firms raise nearly €1 billion over the past 5 years. Yes.
Wow.
Now, none of that is ever specifically attributed to Luxembourg. As I said, we are a house of subsidiaries across all sectors. So when a company raises, I think one of the largest funding rounds we've had raised here was 300 million alone for one single business. That money is never attributed to Luxembourg. It's attributed to the headquarters, wherever that may be it in the UK, the US, etc. But Luxembourg has played a critical role in terms of helping with that fundraising. Not every business is owed money. To me, quite honestly, the culture in Europe of supporting what I would call zombie businesses is far too common. It's too easy to get subsidies. And businesses that are maybe just trickling along, that shouldn't be surviving, that should be allowed to die, so that like a phoenix, the entrepreneur can rise from the ashes again, having learnt a few lessons along the way, and build a second coming of a better business. That's what works in the US. That's what makes the US successful. Businesses die and the entrepreneur tries again. The greatest lessons people learn are from those failures. But when good businesses are here, we really don't have an issue getting them funding. Europe as a whole generally has a huge issue when it comes to later stage financing. Therein, most firms do go towards US entrepreneurs, US venture capitalists. US venture capitalists just simply have significantly deeper pockets. Now that's a broader issue and an EU issue. But in terms of raising sort of seed rounds, round Series A, Series B, I would argue potentially even Series C, we've never really had a problem with helping firms to get access to that capital.
Nasir, you sound like a politician. Any aspirations to become one?
No chance. I think I'll stick to my entrepreneurial side, and rather than dealing with the politics, I'll leave that to the professionals.
Nasir Zubairi, CEO of the LHoFT, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.